Karen Dalton is sort of a mythical figure in American folk music. Born in Texas and raised in Oklahoma, Dalton grew up poor and married at just 15 years old. By the early 1960s, she had 2 divorces and 2 children. At just 21 years old, she left those children behind and fled her rural roots to make for New York City. When she arrived, Dalton immediately ingratiated herself to Greenwich Village's burgeoning folk music revival scene. She became a regular at the iconic Café Wah, where she frequently played alongside Fred Neil and a young Bob Dylan. Dylan gushes about Dalton in Chronicles, saying Karen had a voice like Billie Holiday's and played guitar like Jimmy Reed. The Billie Holiday comparison was a frequent one for Dalton, and it's easy to see why. Her voice has a round, raw sort of sorrow, the pains of her life laid plain in every word.
Are you leaving for the country? You say the city brings you down.
Dalton herself wasn't such a fan of the Holiday comparison, stating that she was more influenced by the blues great Bessie Smith, so she might have resonated more with Fred Neil's take on her voice. She sure can sing the shit out of the blues. Either way, it was clear to everyone in the scene that Dalton was a special kind of talent. As someone recognized and celebrated in such an important scene, one might expect Dalton to have an enormous impact on music history. And she does have some big names who have sung her praises, figures like Nick Cave, Joanna Newsom, and, as previously mentioned, Bob Dylan. But for the most part, Dalton's talents have sort of been lost to time. And there's a couple of reasons for that. For one, she had intense stage fright, preferring to play music with close friends in intimate settings. Perhaps because of that, she had little interest in submitting herself to the whims of the music industry. She only ever recorded 2 studio albums in 1969 and 1971, long after the height of the Greenwich folk scene. And most tragically, Dalton struggled with substance abuse issues and addiction. When her albums failed to perform commercially, Dalton fell off the map, sinking into addiction and disappearing from the public eye until she died in 1993 after living with AIDS for the better part of a decade. Dalton's story fits the archetype of so many great musicians, loved by the scene in their day, but forgotten by the wider music world. It's yet another tragic tale of a truly generational talent that never got to flourish like she could have. Okay, so by this point you might be a little confused, because as beautiful and tragic as Karen Dalton's story is, you probably clicked on this video expecting a story about the 1994 Eurodance banger turned meme song Cotton Eye Joe by Rednex. And well, that is this video. But video essays are best with weird, pretentious intros, so just hold tight and let me wax poetic for a few moments if you don't mind. For decades, those 2 studio albums were the only Dalton music that was widely available. But in 2007, Megaphone Music released a live recording made in 1962, when Dalton was living off the grid in a cabin in Colorado. That album documents a performance by Dalton at a small local club called The Attic. It's an intimate recording made by a friend of hers, and it captures her in much more comfort than any of her studio recordings. The whole piece is incredible and sees Dalton taking on songs by Woody Guthrie, Leadbelly, and Jelly Roll Morton. But for me, one of the great highlights of the album, and the song chosen as its title track, is a slow and sorrowful take on an American folk piece of love and loss. That song, as you're probably guessing by now, is Cotton Eye Joe.
Where did you come from? Cotton Eye Joe.
Before we get too deep into the story of Cotton Eye Joe, I need to shout out the great Todd in the Shadows, who did a fantastic episode of One Hit Wonderland on the song 9 years ago. I've held off on doing this video for quite a while because I didn't want to step on his toes, and there will definitely be some overlap in these videos. But I think I've got some more to add to the history of Cotton Eye Joe. And beyond that, the present reality of the song has changed a lot since Todd took on the topic 10 years ago. Mostly, that's because of this.
Gada, oh, I've been married a long time ago. What do you come from? What year to go? What do you come from? Bacalado.
Now, I'm too much of a millennial to really have a clue what the skibbity riz is going on here, but I'm gonna do my best to try to explain. As I understand it, sometime in late 2023, videos of a chicken nugget with a Roblox face singing started to go viral on TikTok. Shortly thereafter, the TikToker Razioff released a short video covering Cotton Eye Joe with gibberish in place of the actual lyrics. These two titanic cultural objects collided in early 2024, resulting in one of the biggest viral moments of the year, apparently. I don't really know. I kind of missed all of that. Again, millennial. But apparently, Rednex's original version of the song got an enormous bump on YouTube to the tune of 3 billion views in 26 days because of the meme. For a lot of people, this meme has sort of become a signifier of the current state of online brain rot. And it might be that, but also, I wouldn't be polyphonic if I didn't have a different sort of take on this thing. To understand that take, we need to look at the full history of Cotton Eye Joe. Oh, by the way, the song is known as both Cotton Eyed Joe and Cotton Eye Joe, but Rednex uses Cotton Eye Joe, so we're just going to call it that throughout the video. To tell the story of Cotton Eye Joe, we need to look back. Way back. Back before Rednex, before Karen Dalton, back even before the birth of recorded music. The story of Cotton Eye Joe begins sometime around the American Civil War. In her 1925 book, On the Trail of Negro Folk Songs, the American folklorist Dorothy Scarborough notes that the song was fairly well known in the South, tracing an oral record of it to plantations before the war. That book features a written version of the song's lyrics, which are an echo of an earlier published version from 1882. The 1882 version was documented by Louise Clark Purnell in her book Ditty Dumps and Tots, or Plantation Child Life. That book, like many artifacts from its time, is a little questionable. The whole thing is written in a black dialect, which drew praise from white America at the time, but in hindsight, it's pretty clear to see that this was just feeding into the racist stereotypes of the day. Still, it stands as the earliest documentation of Cotton Eye Joe, which makes it quite relevant to today's conversation. Both Clark Purnell and Scarborough's versions of the song tell the story of a strange-looking man named Cotton Eye Joe stealing the singer's love away. It's possible that Cotton Eye Joe is a slave who runs away with his owner's wife, but really it's kind of hard to tell given how much language and cultural associations have shifted in the last century. Just look at the titular character's name. Neither Scarborough nor Clark Purnell's versions give any clarification as to what Cotton Eye might actually mean. Every article that I could find on this topic seemed to point to each other for answers, or to Wikipedia. Wikipedia, in turn, points to an old website called The Fiddler's Companion, a very old-school site collecting information about classic fiddle tunes, though it does have some citations, so we're going to reference it here. Its entry on Cotton Eye Joe reads as follows. Some think cotton-eyed means to be drunk on moonshine, and a related suggestion is that it refers to an individual who has been blinded by drinking wood alcohol, turning his eyes milky white. Marion Theed believes cotton-eyed may refer to a black person with very light blue eyes. Alan Lomax suggests it was used to describe a man whose eyes were milky white from trachoma, while others have suggested cataracts, syphilis, or glaucoma. Some recall the term referring to the contrast of dark skin around white eyeballs. So really, it's kind of anyone's guess. Throughout the late 19th century, Cotton Eye Joe made the rounds in the American South. From its earliest days, it was tied to dancing, and specifically to the fiddle. The Fiddler's Companion relates the song to a story about a pre-Civil War musician named Cotton Eye Joe, who plays a fiddle made from the coffin of his dad's son. It also notes that by the 1880s, Cotton Eye Joe had become its own dance. That dance, along with the song itself, spread across the South in the late 1800s, becoming enough of a beloved folk song that it was a target for early music recordings in the 1920s. One of the first known recordings was made in 1927 by Fiddlin' John Carson. Carson was a very important musician who helped to originate the genre of country music. His take on Cotton Eye Joe bounces and bops with a vigor that can be reflected decades later in Rednex's upbeat Eurodance jams.
I'd been married a long time ago, never had been to Cotton Eye Joe.
Already, the Carson version has transformed significantly from older documentations. Most of the lyrics have been removed, replaced with ad-libs, line dance instructions, and extended fiddle breaks.
Went around and around.
That same year, Dyke's Magic City Trio released their own version, another fiddle showpiece. A year later, the incredibly named Gid Tanner and the Skillet Lickers recorded their own version, which, again, uses the song mostly as a display of fiddling.
Oh, here's my soul, he's coming back for to be my boy. Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe.
Throughout the first half of the 20th century, a number of different artists from different walks of life put their spin on the song, each of them containing slightly different modifications of the lyrics. In 1944, the folk singer and actor Burl Ives of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer fame recorded a short 1-minute version of the song. That version is a slower lament with a lyrical framing that might sound familiar to you.
Where do you come from? Where do you go?
Now, it's worth noting this probably isn't Ives writing this version, but rather his recording of another version that had been bouncing around the zeitgeist. In 1946, the Western swing legend Bob Wills released his take on the song. His version uses the familiar "If it hadn't been for Cotton Eye Joe, I'd have been married a long time ago" refrain, but also features a few self-referential lines talking about the song Cotton Eye Joe itself.
Down in the cotton patch down below, everybody singing the Cotton Eye Joe, everybody singing the Cotton Eye Joe. Had it not been for Cotton Eye Joe, I'd have been married a long time ago, I'd have been married a long time ago.
By now, Cotton Eye Joe was a pretty beloved standard in a lot of country circles, particularly in the bluegrass scene, which emphasized the sort of old-time fiddling that the song allowed for. But I'm going to be honest, I really didn't know any of this before digging into the video. The version that got me interested in doing a deep dive into the song in the first place wasn't any of these older takes, nor was it Rednex's, nor even Karen Dalton's. I first became interested in Cotton Eye Joe years ago when I heard a 1959 recording by Nina Simone. Like Burl Ives before her, Simone sings the song as a slow, lilting ballad and uses the "Where did you come from, where did you go" refrain.
Where do you come from, my Cotton Eye Joe?
When Simone sings the song, she strips the playful air, instead performing it as a heartfelt lament for Cotton Eye Joe and laying the whole thing atop a beautiful piano bed.
If it hadn't been for old Cotton Eye Joe.
It's a version that gives the song the sort of pain and gravitas that Karen Dalton would build on a few years later. This sort of diversity is the beauty of folk music. It's easy to look at these versions as completely different songs from Fiddlin' Johnny Carson's or from Rednex's, and in many ways they are different songs, but also, they are all Cotton Eye Joe. These are songs playing in the same musical and lyrical lineage, and songs that all take on a similar archetypal image, that of a would-be love running off with someone else. Folk songs are malleable objects that can be molded and changed to fit the times or the performers. And as times progressed beyond the 60s, Cotton Eye Joe continued to play its part in American culture. In 1980, it was featured on the soundtrack to 2 different movies, Honeysuckle Rose and Urban Cowboy. This helped bring more mainstream attention to the song and started a slow creep toward the version that you know and love, or hate, today. In 1985, the Moody Brothers released an instrumental version of the song with a thumping stomp beat. Then, in 1992, the Irish folk band The Chieftains released their own version of it, featuring the bluegrass legend Ricky Skaggs. That version is mostly instrumental, doing a brilliant job of showing the shared lineage between American country fiddling and traditional Celtic fiddling. Really, it's a remarkable piece of music, and it even earned a Grammy nomination for Best Country Instrumental Performance. Except it's not entirely instrumental. It features 2 short vocal refrains, once at the beginning and once midway through. And those refrains might sound a little familiar to you.
If it hadn't been for Cotton Eye Joe, I'd been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
It's this chieftain's version that caught the attention of 3 producers who were the minds behind Rednex. I don't want to do a disservice to Sweden by trying to pronounce these names, so I'm not gonna. These 3 producers got into the studio and went to work on their own take on the classic American folk song. They wrote new verses which depict Cotton Eye Joe not as a funny-looking character, but rather as a handsome and charming rake with a reputation for stealing hearts. And then they threw a club beat behind the whole thing.
Cotton Eye Joe, I've been married a long time ago. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe?
As Todd in the Shadows points out, the combo of a Eurodance beat with Cotton Eye Joe isn't actually as out there as it might seem at first blush. The reality is that Cotton Eye Joe has historically been a dance song. This is just porting it into a different dance tradition. And well, it worked, I guess. Cotton Eye Joe topped charts around the world, blowing Rednex up for a hot minute before finding immortality as a staple of elementary school gymnasiums and Ottawa Senators games. It would be easy to lament the fact that Cotton Eye Joe is a serious, important piece of music, most often remembered as a bit of an annoying one-hit wonder song, but I choose to take the other path and say that it's actually really cool that a song that might have been otherwise confined to country and folk circles is now known around the world. And that finally brings us all the way back to Gadagadi Gadagada Go. I feel like a fool. Some might dismiss Gadagadi Gadagada Go as just another dumb meme, because, well, it sorta is. But it's also something bigger than that. It's someone putting their own spin on an old song, reframing it within a new cultural context. And that's part of the practice of folk music, of folk culture. The modern world is very obsessed with intellectual property and commercial consumption of art. But for most of human history, that's not how culture has worked. Human culture has always operated as a loose flow of ideas, with people remixing and putting their own spins on common threads. And that's what meme culture is. As irreverent and stupid as it is, meme culture is folk culture. And so Rednex and Gadagadi Gadagada Go, whether they intended to or not, are participating in the exact same tradition as Karen Dalton or Fiddlin' John Carson. I can't believe that's a sentence I just said, but here we are. If you go into the comments of many of these early versions of Cotton Eye Joe, you'll find something near the top that looks like this. The Gadagadi Gadagada Go. I tried to polyphonic at that one, it didn't work. The Gadagadi Gadagada. Yeah, no, scroll up, it's very funny. The Gadagadi Gadagada. I'm just gonna say the meme. The meme is teaching kids about this folk history. A generation that otherwise probably would have had little to no interest in old-time fiddlin' or American folk music is now being introduced to some of the most brilliant minds in music history. Some will probably write it off as a funny fact and nothing more, but for some this could be the spark of a genuine interest and could maybe even inspire them someday to do their own interpretation of Cotton Eye Joe. In doing so, they'll be adding new chapters to a story that dates back over a century, and they'll be keeping a cultural tradition alive, preserving the knowledge of human creativity for the next generation, however they decide to interpret it. We now know the answer to where Cotton Eye Joe came from, and only the future will tell where it'll go. Okay, so I've been working on this video for about a week now, which means Gadagadi Gadagada Go, or Rednex, or some variation of Cotton Eye Joe has been stuck in my head nonstop. So, hi puppy. There's a puppy there. So I decided that to clear my brain and hopefully get this nonsense out of my head, I wanted to go learn something. And to do that, I checked out Brilliant.org. Brilliant.org is a hands-on learning site with thousands of lessons across dozens of fields. These lessons have been crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, Google, and more. If you're looking for a place to start, check out their creative coding course, which can help you step out your code game. Brilliant.org uses lessons that help build critical thinking skills through problem solving, not just bland memorizing. And best of all, these lessons are quick. If you devote just a few minutes each day, you can develop real, tangible skills that can help you advance personally or professionally. If this sounds like something you're keen to do, you can get started at absolutely no cost to yourself by going to brilliant.org/polyphonic. Following that link will get you a 30-day free trial, and after that, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription. So if you want to keep advancing your learning goals today, you can check out the link in the description. Going to that link is a great way to support my channel, and it's a great way to learn something new. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna go never listen to Cotton Eye Joe ever again. Bye.